Um, and I'm really happy to be here today presenting this paper. This is the third paper I've done at this conference over, I think, maybe the last 5 years. And something really neat about that for me is that my practice fundamentally hasn't changed too much. There's different takes to approach it to within this community. And really what I'm going to share what my paper is and is about, but the overarching approach to my paper that I think is maybe slightly unique in the artificial intelligence space right now, especially within the arts, is this question of, is artificial intelligence predictive and responsive, or is it actually a creationary force? Is it something that we should be using and educating as if it is also producing a world, not just responding to an existing world? So my paper is called, How Can We Educate Artificial Intelligence Based on the World We Have? How can we educate artificial intelligence based on the world we want instead of just the world that we have? As I'm sure many of you are familiar, artificial intelligence is essentially created by looking at existing data and creating predictive outcomes, or creating outcomes, sets of inputs and outputs, but with a set of inputs that always exists, always is not just historically existent information, but is information that was bothered to be collected, bothered to be measured, and can be collected and measured. So in my practice, I look at systems that are privately held but publicly important systems, particularly algorithms held by big tech corporations such as Google and Facebook, and look at the ways in which content created by anybody can impact and re-educate what these systems are and how they think. And I do this particularly with wanting to educate AI, not just on what has been, but to actually make future inputs, creationary inputs into AI as a completely different approach to creating AI based on the world that I personally want. But then by taking that, by taking that approach of this is the world that I want, I'm also hoping to visualize for other people how these non-visual systems work. It's one of the reasons why I love the EVA title so much, is that for me, it's not just about how systems visualize, but how we make invisible systems visible to people who are not within this community that we are. And I know this has been brought up a couple times today. How do we bring more people into these technologies and how they work, such that we're not the only ones having this conversation, such that they're being created with culture first, or culture in mind, not just video games, not just commerce, not just political systems, but actually these creationary forces, which I very much believe them to be. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen quickly to talk through the core example that I go through in my paper. Let's see, we'll share my desktop. Okay, I think you guys can see it here now. Okay, so one of the ways that I approach these algorithms is through search engine optimization and through creating metadata and a whole bunch of content, which essentially reprograms Google's AI just based on speaking the input language that the internet desires. And this is predominantly done only by e-commerce companies or people with a political or financial interest in the education of these algorithms. So Google has a bunch of AI in its search algorithms. Facebook has a bunch of AI in its recommendation algorithms. And the content that's fed and therefore educating these things, who is making it and where do those motivations come from? So when you search on Google, the next American president, and I think I can do this in incognito mode as well, but I think sometimes that messes with Zoom. So I'm signed in, but you can do this from anywhere in the world, on any computer, any person. And this was true during the US presidential election as well. When you search the next American president, instead of getting what previously was here, photos of either candidate, we get these vision boards that are on canvas, very traditional, very crafty, very girly, very feminine works that I make that are about the president that I want. And what is happening as a result of these images being top search results is not just that there's an education occurring where people say, wait a minute, like, how did this get here? How was I able to surpass all of these major news sources? And this is slightly disrupted now because CNN picked up the story and talked about it. So right now, a lot of the images are actually being pulled from CNN, but it's not like I had access to CNN before this this hack occurred. And I can show you the historical results as well. But you see that this is not just what I call search engine manipulation, search engine art, search engine hack. By being the top search result on Google, we can tell that these have infiltrated the brain of AI and are now inputs into what AI is being educated about what an American president might be. So before something like this, we would have an AI that is created, let me just switch back to it, an AI that is created based on how does it predict what the next president's going to look like or who it's going to be. It's going to look at historic data, and historic data for something like this is very demographically narrow. And again, if we're looking at AI as something that is just predictive, something that is just responsive, not something that is also creating a future, then this makes a lot of sense. But I think more and more we're going to see AI forces as not just these outputs, but as actual things that are impacting future decisions, results, modes, media going forward. So the question for me is, how do we take this idea of essentially creating an education system for AI that's not just based on historic data on algorithms on the internet in forms that are acceptable to these algorithms? When we as people go to art museums and we see art, we're not entirely sure what's happening in the human brain. But one way I think of talking about it is that there is this productive uncertainty. We see images that came from other people, from other cultures, from other experiences, and it creates a productive disruption in our own brains about otherness. It doesn't fit into a sanitized data set. It isn't an unbiased image. It's an image of complete perspective. It is not truth. It is one person's truth. And that knowledge and that literacy that exists within art and occurs with us as people, I think is really important into the brains of AI as well. So the thesis that I'm working off of is that AI is something that we should be thinking about as a small child, as someone that is going to, to have to take care of us when we're older. And we want to raise this child and raise these children in ways that it can appreciate otherness. And it's going to be messy. It's going to be full of uncertainty. And instead of looking at data sets and trying to take out bias and take out perspective, trying to sanitize, trying to make these things as neutral as possible, my belief is that we should be putting as much bias into AI as we can. But it shouldn't just be white Western male bias. It should be bias coming from every image maker in the world. And this content exists. It's just not being fed to the internet in a way that the internet prefers to receive. And the people that are creating content that the internet prefers to receive are primarily people who are trying to sell us things. It's an e-commerce platform. And so the technical side of how this works is, like I said, it's search engine optimization. There's some metadata, but so much of it, I'm about to share my screen for a second here, is actually in the language itself. So for each of these projects that I do, I make what I call a net art vision board. So these are physical vision boards that we see on Canvas, and these get exhibited in museums and art galleries and create this conversation about what do these really intangible systems look like. But the websites themselves use technology's inability to parse desire, in its inability to do anything but measure relevance. AI and most programming just measures relevance. How relevant am I and my images to the next American president? How relevant is X to Y? And in human language and human experience, we have hope, we've got fear, we've got desire. And when I say to you, I want the next American president to value nature, you understand that I'm talking about aspiration. I'm not creating something fake, I'm creating something aspirational. However, over time and repetition, Google's algorithms and the AI that underlines it is just learning that I am relevant to the next American president. And this compression of all forms of relationship into relevance is well, terrifying, but also potentially fun and creative and playful. So a website like this that I'm showing now is the core sort of operative mode of how I'm able to become the top search result for, this is the main example in my paper, but I take over political systems, I take over art world systems, I do a lot with how women are represented online and who has the opportunity to express those things. And just by saying over and over again, keyword, the next American president, I desire the next American president holds certain values, the next American president image, the next American president is something that I want to manifest. And I'm speaking in this way that means one thing to people and a very different thing to the technology that is interpreting it. And this playful and problematic space is I think a really amazing opportunity for us to be thinking about AI differently, and then also to be educating more and more people about how easy these systems are to appropriate, and that appropriation being done for artistic purposes as a medium instead of as a culture democracy ending system. Thank you.